Story number one. I had spent more than 20 years exploring the bones of ancient worlds, brushing the dust from empires erased by time, but nothing in my career had ever truly frightened me. Archaeology is not a discipline built on ghost stories or wild fantasies. It is a careful, rational pursuit, weighed against the evidence of the earth. This particular expedition was to a forgotten patch of ground in the Middle East, cut away from the world by stretches of blank, windswept land. There was little to see above the surface. Blank hummocks, cracks of desiccated mud. Yet ground-penetrating radar told us there were tunnels below, vestiges of a once mighty kingdom reduced to whispers in soil. Weeks slipped into months, dead ends, collapsed rooms, pottery shards too worn to tell stories. The diggers eventually uncovered the beginning of a mud tunnel, roughly caved out. It vanished into blackness, and none of the laborers wanted to go deeper, superstitious or perhaps just wise. The project timeline grew brittle, and I grew restless. I convinced myself the only way forward was to press on, alone. So one evening I slipped down into the tunnel, the earth swallowing the daylight behind me. It was immediately oppressively dark. My headlamp's beam was a pale and frail thing, barely prying loose the secrets from the ancient gloom. The air was thicker below, damp, carrying the scent of old clay and something else, something metallic. I forced myself to go onward, one careful foot after another, planning to survey and mark the walls myself, just until I found something of significance. That was when the sounds began, soft at first, then multiplied, like something brittle breaking under weight. Crack, crack. I paused, thinking of rodents, but the sequence was too deliberate, timed to my steps. I turned to look behind, my own footprints caught in the halo of my lamp. Empty tunnel, though the echo of something armored seemed to retreat into the shadows. I listened, telling myself it was just the groan of a settling tunnel. Perhaps the metallic clang was a loose button on my jacket, or old tools left behind. The metallic odor grew suddenly sharp, almost sweet, as if rust, blood, and decay had mixed in the stagnant air. My mouth filled with the taste of old copper, and my throat tightened. If that wasn't enough, my headlamp began to flicker, pulsing in and out of vision until it blinked out entirely. Driven by protocol or maybe desperation, I pulled the emergency candle from my pocket and thumbed my lighter, sheltering the flame with a shaking hand. Flickering yellow light painted the rough mud walls. That's when I saw it, someone crouched in the middle of the tunnel, its back turned towards me. My immediate thought was that one of the locals had gotten stuck underground, or perhaps I was seeing a trick of shadow. Fear slithered up my spine, but I called out, steadying my voice. Nothing. No motion, no reaction. Only the candle's meager, trembling illumination. The smell worsened as I neared. My guts knotted. The figure was not clothed. No, it was almost unclothed by nature itself. It was a man in shape, but what little skin clung to bone was charred, seared as if someone had doused him in acid. Skin sagged from the arm and throat, dripping gore that hissed as it touched the earth, as if the tunnels themselves rejected him. The sockets of his skull were scooped empty, blacker than blindness, yet somehow the lack of eyes seemed more focused than actual sight. He was looking at me, or through me. I stepped back. Bones snapped behind me, or maybe it was my own heart thrashing in my chest. I wanted to run, but the candle guttered, flame almost lost in my trembling. Just as I turned, trying desperately to stumble away, the figure stood now in front of me, closer, impossibly so, blocking the narrow exit with arms outstretched. The heat from his wounds reached me. A sour, electric pain lanced through my hand. The world folded inward. Blackness, choking, then nothing. I awoke under the tented sky, ringed by anxious colleagues. They told me I had fallen, bruised my head, and lay unconscious in the mud tunnel. The archaeologist in me wanted to believe their version, ready to dismiss the nightmare. Yet my memory resisted, scrolling backward again and again to that impossible moment. What shook me most, though, was the mark. A fresh burn, like acidic fingers, singed across my skin, still raw among my old excavation scars. The medic rubbed ointment on it, muttering it was likely caused by a brush with sharp minerals in the rock. The skeptic in me repeated this. Still, the mark throbbed, blistered, and even the antiseptics failed to dull the ache. That night, the wind shrieked across the desert, rattling my tent poles in sudden gusts. The scrape of claws, or perhaps just cracked branches, dragged at the fabric outside as I tried to sleep. Sometime after midnight, Cold hands seemed to tug at my legs. The touch was subtle, not violent, but persistent, impossible to ignore. Every muscle in me froze, and by the time I managed to sit up and peer into the moonlit darkness, the tent was still. I lay awake, waiting for the sun. On the third night, exhaustion finally overtook my nerves. Sleep smothered me. I woke with a jolt. 3:54 a.m., the seconds etched into my mind. There, at the threshold of my zip tent, the same skeletal man waited, just as he had in the tunnel. The burning scent, the charred outline, the empty eyes, indistinguishable in all their impossible reality. No explanation made sense. Sweat pooled on my neck, cold and clammy. Before I dared move, the figure was gone. I was left only with the echo of its pain inside my skin. When we broke camp weeks later, I told no one about what happened. I let them believe I'd fallen, concussed, dreamed the rest. But all these months later, the mark remains on my forearm, a raised, discolored ghost of a hand that no medicine heals. At home sometimes I wake shivering in the dark, that sickly copper scent drifting just at the edge of sleep. The floorboards near my bed sometimes creak with a careful, armored tread, and old pipes clatter almost like brittle bones. I still can't say what happened in that tunnel. Perhaps I hallucinated, knocked strange by a fall, led astray by lack of oxygen and the weight of old stories. Or perhaps, down in the silence beneath the earth, something ancient followed me back. All I know is that since that night, I have never been wholly alone, and every darkness seems to wait for me to close my eyes again. Story number 2. It wasn't meant to be a story I'd tell anyone. Not as something extraordinary, not even as a warning. For all I know, I was just tired, maybe overworked. But the facts remain. Things happened, and some of them can't be explained away, no matter how many times I try. My work at the museum had always been a grounding force, calm, controlled, with dust and history as my daily companions. Field excavations were rarer for me, but this time, I'd been part of the team sent to uncover relics from a forgotten tomb carved into the ochre cliffs. I thought it was going to be routine, another artifact that would blend into the tapestry of my career, something to be cataloged under glass. That changed the night we opened the sealed chest near the tomb wall. Inside, half buried in sediment, was the artifact, a stone slab, no bigger than my palm, marked with what looked like crusty dark stains. I never thought of them as blood, not at first. The stain's edges curled and streaked across the stone in patterns that made no sense, resembling letters or perhaps veins. My colleagues congratulated me. It was called a significant find. By fluke or merit, I was tasked to oversee its documentation and curation. The stone was housed in a new glass cabinet in the east wing, and for several days I'd work late, logging notes, dusting, sometimes just staring at its mottled surface as I sipped cold coffee. It was a Tuesday, past midnight. The museum had long since emptied, each echo down the polished hallways a testament to its emptiness. I heard a jarring crash, glass shattering, sound reverberating off marble and wood. It was close, raw, immediate. I assumed someone, maybe a guard, had dropped a vase. But as I walked toward the noise, the air grew still, heavy, as if everything was holding its breath. The cabinet was in pieces, shards glinting on the checkered floor. But the room was vacant, silent, expectant. The stone lay exposed, surrounded by a fine dust, as if it had been waiting for just this moment. When I picked it up, every hair on my arm stood on end. My pulse battered my temples. There was a shuddering vibration, faint but insistent, traveling up my fingers, along my arm, burrowing deep inside me. Or perhaps it was only adrenaline. I stood there a while, unable to put the stone down, the chill of it seeping into my palm, until finally, almost with revulsion, I set it in a storage drawer, locked it, and went to fetch security. After that night, the boundaries of sense and order began to dissolve. I told myself it was stress, that long hours in dim lights could play havoc on the mind. But that didn't explain the stains. The first time I noticed them, it was just a few rusty smears on the sleeve of my shirt, which I'd left folded on my couch. Maybe I brushed against something in the artifact room, I reasoned. But the stains became persistent. On my bed sheets in uncanny circular patterns that matched nothing else. On the kitchen tiles, ragged streaks appearing overnight, always red-brown and crusted, as if smeared in haste. My fingernails itched, and sometimes I found faint scratches on my own skin, subtle but too deliberate to dismiss as accidental. One morning, the smell hit me as soon as I opened the fridge. coppery, fetid, unmistakable. Inside, behind the milk, was the corpse of a squirrel, fur matted, bald tight, eyes gone. I gagged, thinking someone had broken in, played a twisted joke on me. Living alone was meant to mean security. I always double-checked the locks and the windows. Nothing had been forced. Later, my neighbor saw me dumping the carcass outside and gave me a strange look, but I said nothing. Sleep stopped being restful. Some nights I'd jolt awake from half-dreams jammed with flashes, slippery stone, blood-wet floors, shadows writhing in corners of rooms I've never seen. But I shrugged it off as much as I could. It wasn't until the night the noises started that I began to understand the scope of the disorder. It was near 3 a.m. when the air gets as thick as syrup and every sound is magnified and strange. A wailing, thin but relentless, seemed to bleed from the ceiling above, pressing down through the floorboards. My heart started drumming so viciously in my chest that I thought it would batter its way out. The noises grew clearer with each step towards the attic ladder. I recall the taste of metal in my mouth, the intense cold sweat slicking my back. I pushed open the attic door, and the smell hit first, like burnt sugar and rotting eggs. The attic was crawling, alive, a tide of spiders, thousands of them, coating the walls, scuttling from corner to corner, legs snapping in a dark, churning mass. In the midst of them was the stone, glowing a viscous green, brighter and more sickly than any artificial light. And then, as if conjured by the stone's radiance, she was there. A woman, draped in tattered gray, her long hair tangled and wet against her cheeks. From her eyes oozed thick trails of blood, painting red down her cheeks, pooling on the floor. Her mouth stretched wider than I thought possible. I pressed my hands over my ears, too late. Her scream was blade sharp, not sound but sensation, passing straight through skull and into bone. Something warm trickled down my neck. It was blood, my own dripping from my ears, pooling thickly along my collar. The stone lounged brighter still, the spiders undulating over her feet, a mass grave of restless limbs. I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember, I was cold, sitting on the attic steps. My ears hurt, but there was no blood, no echo of her screaming. The attic, when I forced myself to check, was empty. Boxes stacked as I'd left them. No spiders, no stone. At the museum the following afternoon, I sidled in early, after a sleepless, trembling half-night. I knew what I would find, but part of me still hoped. The stone was missing. They searched, of course. Cameras reviewed, every cabinet and drawer shaken open, but nothing. The rest of the team regarded me strangely, with a mix of annoyance and concern, whispering about security and protocols. I kept quiet. Maybe someone stole it. Maybe I was the one sleepwalking through my own horror, an elaborate trick of the mind brought on by stress, anxiety, and suggestion. I try, when I can, to rationalize. Hallucinations, sleep disorders, a breakdown induced by guilt or pressure. But now, weeks later, the truth remains shapeless, shifting. I see that woman in every half-sleep, scarlet tears veining her face, hear her shrill cry on nights when the wind shakes the house. I check the locks twice, 3 times, but the dread never truly leaves. The stone could have gone anywhere. The stains on my arm have faded. But sometimes I wake to find spider webs that weren't there before, stretched thin across my bedroom ceiling. And in the late hours when the house settles, I still hear faint, sorrowful wailing somewhere overhead. For all I know, it's nothing but a trick of the mind. For all I know, it's not. Story number 3. I have always cherished wandering in the woods. The calm, the dim green light filtering through the branches, mixed with that ancient smell of wet soil and moss. It's the only time I've ever truly felt at peace. I walked alone, unhurried, every sense attuned to the shuffling leaves, the distant caw of a raven, the way the wind flinched and hissed among the trees. That spring afternoon seemed like any other, until the moment I noticed a patch of sick ground beneath a wild tangle of birch. I'd gone a bit off my usual trail, led by absent-minded curiosity to a spot oddly bare amidst the lush undergrowth. Everything was wrong with the place. No shoots, no insects, not even a toadstool's tiny cap breaking the dirt. It looked sunken, almost as if something had pressed down hard from above. The air was thick, stagnant. Kneeling to poke it, I found it cold, stiff. When my fingers scraped the shallow topsoil, I struck metal. A ring, the kind you'd see described in a tattered Victorian novel, burled and ornate, yet shining as if it had only been lost minutes ago. I turned it over in my palm. The gold was unblemished but impossibly cold, so chilling that I flinched despite the mild air. Something about it made my throat tighten, but I pocketed it anyway, half thinking it was worth showing Rob, my friend who worked on the city's archaeology team. Rob always listened, even when my stories trembled on that edge between the natural and the absurd. He took the ring with that blend of skepticism and excitement so common among people who dig for history. Later he called. Some museum folks tested it, he said. Over 90 years old. Victorian, or maybe Edwardian, he wasn't sure. I should come by and see it on display. I visited the museum the following week, my ring now pinned inside a glass case, its chill replaced by sterile lamplight. The exhibit label called it Ring Provenance Unknown, circa 1910. I felt uneasy standing there. The case's reflection warped the golden surface, making the ring look almost like an unblinking eye. That week, stories started trickling in. Museum security claimed they had seen a pale woman in black near the staff entrance, always alone, walking back and forth, pacing furiously. Others mentioned a strange, sick, sweet smell when she was near, like rotten flowers. At first, I laughed. Local kids loved to torment the new museum guards with ghost stories. But then, one cold evening, as I was cutting through downtown, I saw her. She strode along the back wall of the museum, her figure too slim, too angular. Her hair was knotted and dark, her dress long and old-fashioned, trailing along the rain-dark pavement. As she passed beneath the flickering streetlight, she jerked her head toward me. Her eyes pulsed yellow like foxfire, not reflecting light but emitting it. I blinked, and she was simply gone. Not faded or walked away, gone, as if the pavement had unstitched to swallow her. I told myself it was an optical illusion, headlights or a trick of fatigue. My mind clung to rationality as if it could shield me. I even laughed about it, though my voice sounded oddly thin. Whispered rumors kept circulating. The woman was being seen more and more, always near the museum, especially at dusk. Men, they said, spoken to in the shadowy alleys, never seemed quite the same afterwards. Some reported encounters, a hand trailing along their arm, words whispered half-heard and quickly forgotten, dreams of sinking, cold darkness. Then the more serious claims, that if someone spent the night with her, they would vanish, simply never return home. Their phones would ring forever, their beds never slept in again. The next time I spoke to Rob, he was oddly preoccupied. He'd met a woman, he said. She was strange but fascinating, deeply interested in his work. She asked questions about the ring, about how he felt when he found it. He became obsessed. They began dating. He looked better, started dressing sharply. I tried to warn him, reminded him of the stories, the eyes, but he rolled his own eyes, chuckled that he was lucky for some attention. Then, just as the leaves began to turn brittle with autumn chills, Rob vanished. His phone went unanswered. His apartment was empty, dinner half-eaten on the table. Nobody had seen him for days. I went to the museum myself, scanning security footage, talking to night staff. His name was already starting to slip from people's memories. All records of his shifts after the day he started dating her seemed to be missing. At times I wondered if he'd ever existed outside my own memories. I tried to find the woman, searching the museum grounds after hours, standing in the dead patch among the birch trees where I'd found the ring. Sometimes I caught glimpses, shapes melting around corners, a trailing chill in the evening air, footsteps hurrying away on rain-slick pavement. But I never saw her face, never met those eyes again. Winter closed in, then spring returned, endlessly repeating the same patterns, except now with a thin layer of dread running under everything. My life took on the character of someone listening for noises in a supposedly empty house. Some nights I'd wake with the rotten sweet scent of her perfume heavy in my room. My dreams were filled with the museum, its halls flickering with sick yellow light, echoing with hushes and half-glimpsed movements. A full year after Rob's disappearance, a body was found hanging in the rafters of the old shipping warehouse beside the river. I learned of it from a news alert. I went, foolishly perhaps, compelled by guilt or some sense of unfinished duty. It was Rob. He was gaunt, his face twisted into an expression I still can't describe. Around his finger was a ring, my ring, or one just like it, blackened and dull now, as if the gold had burned out from the inside. There was no note. Nobody could explain how he'd come to be there, or why everyone was so uncertain about when, exactly he'd last been seen alive. The woman, of course, was never found again. No more reports, no more glowing eyes. But I started to notice small details. Strangers meeting my gaze just a second too long on city streets, a faint echo of that yellow glow in reflections, a cold spot that lingered at the foot of my bed some nights. Sometimes I could swear I heard a faint humming from the old ring displayed in the museum. Low and metallic, like a distant storm in the earth. I try my best to dismiss it. Sleep deprivation, suggestibility, maybe the old power of urban legend. People vanish all the time. Runaways, secret debts, the simple tragedy of an unhappy mind. Maybe Rob simply couldn't bear the weight of something he'd discovered. Maybe it had nothing to do with antique rings or women with glowing eyes. Still, I avoid wooded paths now, and the museum too. It's not that I believe, not exactly. But when darkness falls, I look over my shoulder. I keep dreaming of gold and birch woods and a thin, sharp scent that means something I can't remember. And in empty places sometimes, I can almost feel someone watching, waiting, with eyes that glow like rotten lanterns in the dark. Story number 4. In the summer of 2019, I assisted on an underwater archaeology project in France, working in a space that felt as though it belonged to no one and nothing. It was a crypt beneath the tumbled stones of St. Maur Abbey, half sunken, half buried. Only during the lowest summer water tables did the crypt open itself, like a wound, for 2 brief months. Most years even that wasn't enough. I had heard older archaeologists talk about the place as if it were a living thing, the river and groundwater pushing up beneath, the walls always slick with old seepage, the floors buckling inward with pressure. My job was simple, but lonely. Process bronze votive ornaments and document them for conservation. The rest of the team worked above, shifting fragments, mapping out the burials. 2 days into the project, we agreed I'd spend my time in the crypt itself. 4 meters below damp earth, black stone, and sun-shattered weeds far above. I was more comfortable alone than most. I told myself I preferred the hush. The crypt was ankle-deep in chilling water. Centuries before, some unknown thieves had wrenched open every sarcophagus. Stone lids, etched with angels, lay cockeyed. Some coffins gaped half full of water, their contents looted or melted by time. When I first stepped in, the day the supervisor unbolted the old doors, my breath hitched in the thick, cold air. There was a presence to the place, though my mind classified it as claustrophobia, a sense of too many histories soaked into the stone. Each morning I carried 2 small cases down the stairs, one for the artifacts and another for my lamp and ledger. When the metal door clanged shut behind me, it was like being buried alive, an old metallic smell, sharper than the rot or mold. Sometimes my light would pick up movement on the black water. A rat once a blind newt, once nothing. Crumbling candles marked a prayer niche. Someone, years before, had tried to make this place less lonely. I sat cross-legged on a flat stone, shins chilling fast, laid out the pieces to record. A twisted bracelet still green with patina, a bell with a mouth clogged in silt, a shrunken cross. My LED lamp flickered, sending wavering bars of light along the low-vaulted ceiling. My pencil scratching was the only sound I could name, though sometimes it seemed like there were shuffled movements in the corner behind the furthest coffin. I told myself it was water, always moving, never at rest. But the sound would slow or quicken if I stared, and some days I caught whiffs of something sour, as if something unseen had been disturbed and left to decay centuries longer than it should have. Midway through my second week, there was a stillness in the air. I'd stopped noticing the ache in my feet and the way my pulse banged behind my eyes. Distracted, I missed a turn in the cataloging, reached for a towel to dry my hands, and that's when I noticed the temperature drop. Still, sudden, as if a loaded refrigerator had swung open. The water around my ankles turned from tolerable to bruising, cold deepening up my legs. The logical side of my brain named it groundwater seeping in, a trick of currents, nothing more. The darker part of my mind offered no explanation, only a stretching tension in my chest. I set my pencil down, tried to find the source. I leaned forward and felt, rather than heard, a pulse in the water, a rhythmic ripple. Not a wave from the stair or a leak from a pipe. A long, slow disturbance, as though someone large had planted a foot in the far corner and shifted their weight. My lamp's glow dimmed, the shadows thickening and swelling against the oldest arch. Low choking noises began bubbling up from somewhere under the floor. It was not the scurrying of rats or the shifting weight of earth, a thick, wet, gargled sobbing that quivered through the stones and up into my teeth. I waited for the rest of the team to come barreling down the stairs to call and slam open the door. But I was totally, helplessly alone. My own mind was running wild. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe water had crept into the electrics or caused some reaction in the circuits. The sounds could be pipes or one of the ancient iron-bellied river cranes working nearby. But I couldn't find those mundane analogs. The noises went on, desperate, slowing, then swelling again, as if something was trapped in the rock and struggling, choking, fighting to rise. I told myself it must be nerves, but sensory details do not lie. My knees bumped against the coffin edge, and the skin on my arms pebble-raised. The metallic stink grew stronger, nearly chemical. I could feel the way the air moved, quick and sharp, pushing at me from the cracks between stones. There was nothing rational left to hold on to. A sudden surge in the water burst from the furthest corner, a hard ripple, splashing, as if a giant had leaped free from the deep. The lamp went brown, shadows gone oily and formless. I snatched up my case and with muscles made clumsy by cold, panicked, I sloshed to the stairs. I did not look back until my feet found the shallow first landing. Gasping, heart hammering, I shone the dimmest arc of lamp back into the crypt, desperate to explain everything as simple as bad wiring, a loose brick, some ancient aquifer. Instead, I saw it, in a patch of older stone behind the second coffin, a handprint, half fading, but clear. Not in mud, not in moss. It seemed stained into the rock, fingers spread, palm pressed inward as though from beneath, as if someone long since interred tried to push out, claw their way free. No child's prank, no running condensation. The shape was wrong, too elongated. It was gone the next day when I found the courage to return with a supervisor. The team joked about my nerves. I tried not to blame them. If it was real, why had the handprint faded? Water sometimes stains, then doesn't. Light can play tricks. And yet, when people talk about this project, they never mention the accidents. The divers who drowned in that same crypt over the decades, always one at a time, in freakish, unexplainable circumstances. Freak accidents, the documents say. Some oxygen failure, some just went under without remark. Part of me insists I was overtired, running on too much caffeine and too little sleep, fighting the dark. Crypts are strange spaces. The mind becomes its own worst enemy. But another part remembers precisely every second of that suffocating cold, every waver in the water, every desperate, bubbling sob. The handprint I saw still in dreams. Sometimes it's pressed to glass, sometimes to stone, always reaching toward me through the water's skin. Even months later, cataloging artifacts in the bright lab, I'd find my hand trembling over a strap or bead, heart racing for no reason. I have never found an explanation that fits what I saw, nor am I sure one exists. The crypt is still there, the water rising and lowering with the earth's rhythms, opening itself again for 2 months every summer. Sometimes I wonder if something still waits beneath, hands pressed against the stone, willing someone, just once, to listen. Story number 5. Most nights working at the Neolithic research site in central Turkey were uneventful. That evening began like all the others. Footsteps crunching on gravel paths, generator hum broken only by the chatter of insects. The air had a whisper of ancient dust, and I was alone for the late artifact cataloging shift. There were no colleagues pulling pranks, no security guards making rounds, just my own tired reflection in the shine of the prehistoric pottery. Most of what I was logging seemed ordinary, at least by dig standards. Battered potsherds, stone axes, a few animal bones tagged and sealed. I ticked boxes on forms. Routine lulled me until my eyes caught on something tucked behind burlap in storage B. I pried it out, a heavy oval of obsidian, polished to a black glassy finish, smooth as oil. Later I'd read the label, Ritual Mirror, Context U5. But in my hands it was spellbinding. The surface drank up the lamplight, looked impossibly deep, bottomless. I snapped a quick photo, the flash reflecting nothing but blackness. It wasn't until the generator wheezed near midnight, making the lights shudder, that the room seemed to thin and peel. I shot a glance at the obsidian, and there it was, a silhouette, slender, tall, gathering shape in the reflection directly behind me. My head snapped around so fast my neck clicked. No one there. The hairs on my arms prickled. Shadows collected at the corners of the lab, and I felt, absurdly, as if something might step out from them. I told myself I was tired, the play of lamplight on uneven glass, catching my own movements or shadows. I set the mirror down, purposefully turning it away from me. What followed was a slow rolling unease I couldn't shake, even as I tried to occupy myself with paperwork. But the mirror wouldn't leave me alone. Every now and then, I'd catch something shifting in it, not my own reflection, but the suggestion of shoulders hunched, a mouth agape, soft movement too quick to pin down. I began checking the doors, peeking in closets, running my flashlight along every corner, rationalizing that I'd seen mice, a moth, my mind filling gaps in the half-light the generator provided. Around 2 a.m., the silence tipped over when a sharp crash rang out. One of the beakers on my supply cart had toppled, glass everywhere. My nerves keened. When I tried to edge away from the growing sense that I wasn't alone, my foot slipped. The world reeled. The floor was slick. I looked down and my hands were smeared maroon, the slickness bright and impossible in the beam of my flashlight. I realized I was flat on my stomach, in a pool of raw, reeking blood. A scream climbed my throat but stuck. As I fumbled to lift myself, my palms found not marble but something clutching, the floor soft as flesh around my fingers, gripping them. I kicked and jerked. The strangest cold pressed up from the tiles, a weight pinning my limbs. The next heartbeat, I was standing, just a little shaken, next to my toppled beaker, glass crunching underfoot. My hands were clean save for a few streaks of ochre dust, my clothes neat except for dirt at the knees. The tiles were spotless. No blood, no sign of anything but normal, sterile marble. My pulse still hammered. Nausea made my hands tremble. I told myself it must have been a hallucination. Lack of sleep. Maybe the artifact's ancient oils contained something that rattled the brain in a confined space. Still, the cold I'd felt seemed to cling to me for the rest of the shift, even as the sun finally paled the windows and my replacements tramped in, oblivious. I left the lab gripping my backpack strap so hard my knuckles were white, eyes scanning the empty road back to my rented house. Every sound made me jump. The bread seller's bicycle, twigs creaking as the wind rose over the step. I caught myself glancing into mirrors, into window panes, even windshields, half expecting to see that silhouette again, teeth bared in a grin. That night I barely slept. When I did, dreams seized me in clammy, stifling arms. In them I ran through endless tunnels beneath the earth, stone pressing in, walls wet and alive. Sometimes I fell headlong into lakes black as ink. Sometimes I stood staring into obsidian, seeing an endless array of faces stacked behind my own. None could move, but all of them stared, desperate, hollow-eyed, as if waiting for me to join them. Rationality tugged at me when I woke. The human mind conjures ghosts from stress and exhaustion. Maybe there were toxin traces in the artifacts. After all, obsidian's a powerful symbol in old rituals. My brain could have run wild with suggestion, but the aftershocks changed something subtle in my routines. I avoided the lab at night, found myself wary of glass surfaces, ducking away from dark reflections. I even covered my bathroom mirror with a towel once just in case. Work in daylight felt normal again, almost, until I'd spot the boxed mirror sitting near the shipping crates, its obsidian face shrouded, and feel my scalp tighten in cold memory. When the crate finally shipped out, destination, a university in Germany, the lab felt lighter. Colleagues joked I looked less pale. Sleep returned. My hands stopped shaking. Sometimes, though, walking the alleys of the old settlement, I'd get the itch of being watched, a tickle up the spine that no stoic logic could shrug away. It faded as spring crept in, though I'd instinctively step a little quicker through patches of shadow. I never did find proof. The spilled blood, the hands in the floor, nothing. The mirror, boxed and gone, showed nothing odd in any of the official incident logs. Even the photo I'd taken that night just reflected a blank surface, lights blurring at the edges. Still, every arrival of a rookie to our team, I found myself pulling them aside, recounting my story with forced casualness. It isn't the bones we dig that should make you wary, I'd tell them, letting my words hang. Not the things we pull from the earth or the ghost people fear. Sometimes it's the things that stay behind, in the rooms you think are empty, the air that's thick when it should be thin, a reflection that doesn't quite match your own. I'd laugh it off for their sake, grin and change the subject. But sometimes, alone, I catch myself avoiding the reach of midnight mirrors, my mind echoing with dreams of obsidian faces and the soft, clutching grip of ancient floors. In the field, there are always reasons: fatigue, nerves, tricks of light. Still, I can't say for sure what I saw, and that's what keeps me up at night, listening for footsteps in the silence, at the edge of waking. Story number 6. I'm an archaeologist, not a storyteller, but the things that happened during our field season on that remote Greek hillside refuse to fade away, no matter how much I have tried to explain them with logic. It was the summer of 2022, a season of dry heat and broken pottery, when our crew was dispatched to survey a cluster of ancient tombs overlooking a valley that no tourist brochure would dare mention. The place was nothing special, just wild grass, burnt olive trees, and stony ridges where dogs barked at dusk. Nothing gave away the faint charge in the air, a static prickle at the back of my throat, until we started excavating Tomb 6. Most of the burials we opened were typical, centuries-old bones packed into dust and fragmented by time, offerings blackened and unremarkable, brittle inscriptions warning of curses, yes, but nothing we hadn't seen before. But Tomb 6 was different. We found bones, but not laid loose or peacefully. They were jumbled, tangled deliberately together, 8, maybe 10 individuals, and the first thing that struck me was their unnatural postures. Wrists tied, faces turned toward a central pit, mouths open as if mid-scream. I poked at one face and felt papery fragments peel off. It was a mask fused by dirt, molded to a vision of monstrous features: sharp jaws, curling horns, black holes for eyes. In the sun, the mask's clay took on a greasy sheen. A dark spot on the cheekbone made my scalp prick. It looked as though the mask had once bled. The others in the trench muttered about ritual sacrifice, and I wrote it up matter-of-factly in my notebook. Still, I could not bring myself to touch those masks for long. Ancient Greeks practiced some strange rites, yes, but this felt wrong, somehow darker and more deliberate. Later that week, we forced open a large stone sarcophagus at the pit's center. We expected dry bones or maybe grave goods, but within, we found a man, alive. Even now, I hesitate to write this plainly, but there was no mistaking it. He was shockingly thin, the skin of his torso plastered to his ribs, eyelids fluttering, black as bruises underneath. The stench was not only of rot, but of metal, something sharp and chemical, like when you sniff at a battery. Everyone froze. I remember the first time he moved, a twitch of his left pinky, how no bird called out in the sudden silence. The man's mouth was covered with ancient cloth, thickly crusted. When we finally removed it, his lips were shredded, as though he had been biting through years of fiber and dirt. Around his body, crumbling lead tablets were pressed against his skin. Cursed tablets, if you go by local legend, a way to bind someone to silence for eternity. We had our supervisors, medical help, the entire site in an uproar. The authorities insisted the site had been untouched for at least 2 millennia. Our instruments, ground-penetrating radar, everything supported this. Yet the man was alive, barely, skin the color of candle wax, unblinking for minutes at a time. His eyes had a film to them, as if submerged underwater. There were marks on his chest, shallow carvings, undulating shapes, a spidery sigil that no one in the team recognized. Rationally, you can write most of it off. He could have been an undisturbed hermit, some lost madman who crawled into the tomb on his own. Maybe someone planted him there for a hoax, though no camera picked up strangers, and no local police report had an answer. The lead tablets, years later I'm sure of it, could have poisoned him. Lead madness, causing hallucinations, delirium, maybe near catatonic suspension that looked like slow death. Science offers explanations if you want them. But that week, it felt as if all rules of the site disintegrated. Our camp electrics failed despite fresh batteries and checks. At night, our field lamps flickered, with blue-white after-images dancing across the stones. My skin kept crawling with sensations as though spiders traced up my spine. But nothing was there. The digital camera memory wiped. My hands shook as I checked. Barometers read sudden plunges, and so did my own ears, stopping up with pressure when clouds would gather without warning. The sky, golden and clear at breakfast, would turn a turgid pewter by noon every day the man lay in intensive care. No one wanted to be alone in the medicine tent. The patient became less and less corporeal, sometimes so still that we had, on 3 occasions, called for a pulse check just to be sure he was still alive. There were times when I stood outside at sunset, nearly sleepwalking back to the trench, and thought I could smell burning tallow in the air, the exact waxy animal reek of old rituals described in textbooks. One night, I woke with the heavy certainty that sand had filled my mouth. I spat, but it was only the taste, acidic, granular, impossible to rid myself of. I attributed it to stress. On the 6th day of his rescue, the man died. The reason was never logged properly. His heart had been strong for his terrible condition. He had no known disease, no visible cause for death. I saw his face after they covered the body, a peace so unnatural I felt something crawl in my gut, a stillness more profound than sleep. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he asphyxiated. Perhaps his organs had withered beyond repair. The medical team mumbled theories, but none believed their own words. Our team disbanded early that summer. The artifacts and bones were packed hurriedly. The masks, the tablets, the samples, none of them seemed as solid or real as before. I returned home half convinced I'd been pranked, exhausted by jet lag and guilt for not doing more. No one asked for my field diary, and I never volunteered it. Years have passed, the seasons come and go. In my office, I sometimes find chalk dust on my desk, though no one uses chalk anymore. When I touch the smooth plastic or stone, a faint, greasy residue sticks to my fingers. And sometimes, if I catch myself in the mirror late at night, the bones in my face feel sharper, as if a mask is being pressed into my skin from behind. People say the ancient world was filled with superstition, and that science clears out such dark corners. Most days I agree. The living man in the coffin was perhaps some freak accident of physiology, an outlier, a coincidence impossible and yet observed. But some nights, as shadows fall in the shape of horns across my walls, I remember the silence of that tomb, the mask's oily sheen, the taste of sand in my mouth. Skeptics would say it was nothing, that all things have cause and effect, that the world is never as strange as it seems at dusk. Still, I sometimes wonder what it was exactly that we uncovered, and what, if anything, it had been waiting for, 2,000 years in the dark. Story number 7. Last year, in the first bite of October, I was sent on a field assignment beneath the twisting alleys of Cusco, inside the stone belly of a colonial monastery. The old friars called it the Labyrinthos. We were supposed to clear out some crumbling storage tunnels, relics from centuries ago, and assess anything worth restoring for the city's museum. On the first morning, as I descended the claustrophobic spiral steps with the others, the air carried a sharp bite of mountain cold. Someone joked about ghosts, but I felt the chill travel straight to the roots of my teeth. Too sudden, too deliberate, more pointed than the usual Andean breeze. The tunnels, caked with ancient dust and the scent of wet rock, sprawled with low, arched ceilings and blind corners that made every step uncertain. I moved alone, flashlight in one hand, gloved fingers trailing the damp, rough stone. Deep in the innermost chamber, wedged behind a toppled crate, I found an old olive green jar. Not Incan, not Spanish, just wrong in its plainness, sealed tight with a stone stopper. Inside was a viscous black sludge, neither solid nor liquid, its surface seeming to shiver at my presence. I reached in to clean the outside, but the lid slipped, and a smear of that black muck oozed under my glove, settling cold and thick into the lines of my palm. The smell was sudden sharp rot, like uncured leather, or something worse. I wiped, then scrubbed in panic at the nearest water basin, but nothing worked. The smear clung to me, immune to soap or bleach. All it did was burn my skin with each pass. By the time we climbed out, my hand ached with a deep throb. Everyone else's faces were pinked from exertion, but I felt drained, as if the cold from the tunnels had infected my marrow. That night, as I lay in my rented room, exhaustion didn't bring sleep. From the very edge of wakefulness, I heard the first whispers, so soft they might have been a draft or far-off voices, yet they pressed against my ear, too insistent. The words never made sense, just wet murmurs like lips grazing skin. As I rolled over, expecting to catch the trick of an echo, I felt damp, shallow breaths across the nape of my neck, slowing with the rhythm of my own. The hair on my arms prickled. I whimpered, alone. When I flicked on the bedside light, the room was empty except for my own trembling outline, reflected in the small mirror. Sleep came in fitful fragments. Each time I drifted, an unseen presence hovered, chilling my vertebrae, threading a weight around my chest. When I woke, I found red, angry rashes tracing my arms and torso. At first like thin lines, then angry wheels that felt hot to the touch. My nails were caked with skin, crescent marks gouged all along my chest and thighs. I must have scratched myself raw in my sleep, though my memory held nothing but the whispers and that breath at my neck. I tried ointments, antihistamines, even home remedies from street vendors, but nothing helped. The rashes crept and merged into patchy whines, burning, itching, then dissolving as if digested by my own body. My nose bled without warning. I felt toothaches, burning and throbbing, swelling my cheeks so badly I barely recognized myself. I couldn't eat, and my gums bled black in the morning. 4 days in, I went back to the tunnel to try to find answers. The jar was still sealed on the shelf where I'd left it, but as I watched, something impossible happened. Through the closed lid, rivulets of black liquid wormed their way down the sides, too viscous to be condensation, more like tar. I wiped one away with a rag. It left a permanent stain on my skin, as if it had burned into my capillaries. I imagined the blackness creeping under my own flesh, a slow infection I couldn't quite name. That night, I saw myself in the mirror at midnight, my face pale and bruised, the scratch marks blooming and receding, a pattern like roots or veins. I would watch my body crawl with this living blackness, but by the cold light of dawn, my skin was nearly perfect again. I checked my reflection dozens of times each day. Am I still myself? Was I imagining all of it? On the 6th day, I couldn't stand the isolation, the sense that something was inhabiting my every breath, watching me from the corners of empty rooms. So I decided to turn the jar over to the forensic department when we returned to town. I gave it to a colleague, Marcio, a friend who owed me a favor and respected my nervousness. I didn't tell him everything. I was afraid of sounding unstable, or worse. A week passed. The physical afflictions eased, but my dreams were still thick with that syrupy blackness. Out of nowhere, I heard Marcio had to be admitted for psychiatric observation. He had begun ranting about infants, black rivers, and eyes in the floor. Some said he'd been up late the night before, working on the sample. The whisper reached me that the liquid in the jar matched the properties of human blood, altered with coal and trace alloys. Worse still, the DNA markers pointed to a newborn. For days after, I replayed every moment in that tunnel. The shiver of unseen breath, the scratching under my skin as if tiny hands crawled beneath the surface, the blood that would not stop. I tried to convince myself, fungal spores, mass hysteria, the power of suggestion. Maybe I lost track of what was real underground, the labyrinth playing tricks on a mind primed for fear, exhausted and alone. Maybe there was an explanation in the cold, the darkness, and the centuries of buried suffering. But even now, in the quiet of my apartment halfway across the world, sometimes I wake to the rustle of invisible lips at my ear and a cooling breath at the back of my neck. I press the back of my hand, searching for rashes that aren't there, yet sure that blackness is still moving inside me, waiting. When I look in the mirror late at night, just out of the corner of my eye, sometimes I think I see another reflection. Just a little too close, as if something is waiting to wake. And in those moments, I wonder if I brought something with me after all, or if all I have are memories and skin-deep fear. Nobody can say for sure, but there are things that live in the spaces beneath, and sometimes they only need someone like me to let them in.